Hi, this is Shambhavi. Welcome to my weekly podcast about spirituality, love, death, devotion, and waking up while living in a messy world. The Satsang with Shambhavi podcast is recorded live each week with students of our nonprofit community, Jayakula. For more information and to find out about attending a satsang, visit jayakula.org. Thanks for listening. Much love to you, wherever and however you are.
Honesty is the basis of everything. It's the basis of happiness. It's the basis of relaxation. It's the basis of practice. If we're not honest, if we're in a state of fantasy, or in a state of reactivity where we have these automatic responses to be less than truthful, for whatever reason, we're never dealing with the circumstance. We lose the ability to self-reflect. So I think the greatest treasure that any practitioner has is to be able to honestly self-reflect. To be able to say to yourself what condition you're really in. To be able to hear reflection when it's given to you. If you can't hear honest reflection or true reflection, then you're in some other condition of not honesty, right? So this is an absolute treasure. And then to whatever extent one is not honest, you're unrelaxed, you have tension. I mean, lack of honesty or self-defensiveness that involves lack of honesty, or lack of ability to self-reflect honestly, or receive reflection honestly, means that you have some anxiety, you have some tension, and you're in a state of reactivity, and you're operating out of impulse. And this is what we're trying to interrupt. Some people come in with a very good ability to self-reflect, some people not. Some people have experiences in life that cause them to not be honest, to choose dishonesty as a way of getting what they want. So when you're in a situation where your goodness is thwarted, where your desires are thwarted, especially your desire for love or being heard or being taken care of properly, and there's too much restriction when you're growing up. This can cause dishonesty to arise, because you'll still try to get what you want, even if you're being restricted or being told that's a bad thing or whatever's happening. You'll still try to get what you want, and you'll have to become devious. And this has to be unlearned. Deviousness has to be unlearned. And the other thing that can happen is we have dishonest caretakers with parents and parents. They're dishonest. We learn a pattern of dishonesty. For instance, my parents were not dishonest in general, but they had some habits that were sort of standard American habits, like racking up credit card debt and then moving debt from one credit card to another. That is something that's considered to be normal in some families, and it's certainly normal in our family. It's talked about openly. You can go to another credit card with 0% interest per year and move all our debt over to that credit card. This causes tension. It is a form of dishonesty. And you have to spend your life managing stuff like that, worrying about it. Somehow it's better to have it, you keep racking up debt, and it's better to keep pushing it around and actually pay off the debt. So it's a state of penance. It wasn't until I was in my 30s that I realized, wait a minute, this is not good. And I took some years and I paid off all my credit card debt, and it felt so good. It's like, it's relaxing. That's a minor thing. Even a minor thing, like achieving something, check up on it. Anything like that. Even a minor thing causes tension, causes dis-ease. certainly when people have a habit of lying, whether it's like a consciously manipulative or a knee-jerk self-defensiveness or deviousness to try to get what you want or some other thing, you're in a constant state of anxiety. That stuff causes constant anxiety. And you can't be straightforward about what you want. And when you're having to balance things, and then if you're in a constant state of self-defensiveness, all of those things are bad for our health, and it's not possible to progress speedily in practice to do of incurring the karma. So it's not a moral question, it's a functional question. It's not about being a bad person. Nobody who lies is a bad person. They're just making themselves ill and making their lives overly complicated. And also, in terms of self-reflection, you're not being able to honestly self-reflect. Then, really, your practice in whatever area that is becomes stuck. The only thing we really have to work with in practice is our actual circumstances. We don't have anything. We don't have our fantasy narrative, fantasy story about ourselves, our lies. You can work with noticing that you're doing these things, but you can't work with the actual fantasy. It's not what's actually happening. So it isn't material that you can use for your sadhana. The only thing you can work with is your real circumstance. And of course, I think the biggest obstacle that I've noticed in students and in our time is that we feel we have to live good to other people and to ourselves. We have to live good with a certain level of accomplishment. And we have to be a certain kind of person that looks like. This is absolutely an enormous obstacle. And then, because we're so fragile, if we see something that doesn't look good, we fall apart. So this is, I think, our number one obstacle as practitioners of the country. We don't want the discomfort and the shame of not looking good. Being thought of as not achieving, not accomplishing, not being a certain way. We bring this all into our practice, and then it creates this pretty big obstacles to our self. And we also then have a big problem taking self-reflection from a teacher or other students. Every small little thing becomes giant because our self-concept is so fragile. It needs so much reassurance, constant reassurance, constant gentleness. I mean, this is just really our number one obstacle. We need more fortitude for that. So maybe this is why a number of teachers have said that kirtan is the practice of Kama Yuga. It is so darn non-threatening. Right? But even then, people are afraid to play kirtan because they're afraid of they don't look good, they don't sound good. They miss the whole point of kirtan. So now, of course, we have professional kirtan. It's that look, we're very polished. They rehearse, they brand, they do all that stuff. And there's nothing wrong with that, except now the regular old people are afraid to play kirtan because it doesn't look that good. Which is one of the reasons why we have messy open mic kirtan. We can have that experience of just being there and being devotional. Maybe not caring so much for how we look. Maybe that's why Ma gave you a teacher who's really bad at playing kirtan. So I can continually demonstrate to you that it's okay to get up there and be bad at something. But think about how fragile you are. Think about it. Really try to grasp that. One little whisper of disapproval. One little whisper of something you imagine as a judgment. One little whisper of so-called failure. One little whisper of seeing something different. One little whisper of thinking other people are different. And it can be the tiniest little thing, and your world just goes into a tailspin. This is not normal. This is something that people have learned. Maybe because I've come from a different generation than a lot of you. I didn't grow up with computers, Facebook. People, this idea that we would have constant projections of our best self out there online. Maybe I'm not as fragile, but just because I didn't grow up that way. I don't know how the older people are going to see it, but I'm sure this has something to do with it. Just consider people's Facebook pages or Instagram. They have these curated versions of themselves. Okay? Very highly selective, curated, filtered, oftentimes just out and out lies. I've had students that I knew were in like states of desperate depression or angst of some sort. But you go on their Instagram, it's like, I'm just having a wonderful time. Shiny, glossy, happy pictures with statements that are just bald-faced lies. Right? What does that do to a person? Then you can't even be intimate with your own friends because you run into a friend on the street. Hey, I saw your Instagram. Sounds like you're doing great. And you're like, oh yeah. So then you can't even have an honest conversation. But how can we be intimate with people when we're always trying to convince everyone that we're other than how we actually are? I'm never at my best.
You're never at your best.
Frankly, I could always be doing better. What would that mean to be at oneself, right? Really? Yeah, and that's a reason to live with other practitioners too. Then you really get seen at not your best. Think of how one is in a job interview and how utterly obnoxious and off-putting it would be if you were doing that all day long outside of a job interview. Mm-hmm. Right? I mean, when people go and do those job interview performances, they're kind of obnoxious. But this is an obstacle for us, that we now live in a time where we feel like we're in a constant job interview. Can you imagine? But I know that it's not this way in all times and spaces. For instance, when I lived my first year in Portland, Oregon, when I was living with a Tibetan couple, and had a lot of contact with their extended family, and also the whole Tibetan immigrant community that they were friends with. I was really struck by how little anyone remarked on anyone else's proceedings. It was just people were doing whatever they were doing, and these were people, many of them had a difficult life before they got here, and everyone was just, that's how they are. That's how so-and-so is. Now, a lot of them were also doing a very intensive spiritual practice. It was a different situation. There was a lot of room, though, given for people weren't expected to perform any particular thing. And when they behaved badly, they were given a lot of room. But there was another side of that, which is people didn't really talk very much about things when they needed to be talked about. Occasionally someone would say to me, why are there these things there? No. There's one thing, which is our historical time-limited situation, where we live in this culture that it's just so tightened, and all the time we're trying to measure up to some ridiculous ideal. So there's that situation of we set these ridiculous bars for ourselves. We set this ridiculous standard made up by us, and then we find ourselves continually striving to meet that standard and absolutely in terror about falling short of these standards that we have made for ourselves. They have nothing to do with anything except us and our fear. So that's one piece of it. The other piece of it is we already are perfect from the beginning. That's the teaching, right? We already are the best, our best. And that all of this play of limitation is really just something ephemeral and not significant in the way we think of it. So those two things are happening at the same time. The suffering part comes because you are buying into this idea that you have to be a certain way. And you feel you're falling short of it. This is what we're trying to cure you of. And so many things happening on all different levels.